Thank you. No, I know that I'm the only one standing between you and lunch, so I'll try to make this as painless as possible. But I have office hours afterwards, so straight after lunch you can find me in room D, I believe, if you have any questions or things you would like to discuss. Architecture smells are those kind of hidden signals that we look for as architects that something is not working correctly. And I won't offer any solutions for my architecture smells, but I will tell you that they will be worthy of further investigation. A small disclaimer, even though I stand here from Statoil, this is not about Statoil. Or especially my lawyers want to say that this is not about Statoil. No, but all the examples are taken from literature and from experiences that I've discovered together with other fellow architects. So even though I might mention Statoil, not all of these things are applicable to Statoil. I'm not saying they're not applicable to Statoil either, but you will have to guess. So we know that security is hard. This is from the East Coast outage, where a bunch of Internet of Things, cameras and routers and everything took down the DNS service on the eastern seaboard and left the internet unusable for you Americans for a long time. We Norwegians, we didn't notice, but we have read about it in the papers. And then, of course, we had our own little one in southern Germany, where the internet provider for southern Germany left all of the routers open with a standard password. That was interesting because it allows them to run all kinds of interesting attacks on their subscribers. And then, of course, it also happens to deal about people. This is from the plane crash in Colombia just before Christmas, where the pilots miscalculated how much fuel they needed for the hop across the Andes, and they didn't make it all the way. So this is about security. It's not about technology as such, but it's much more about the culture of the company, it's about the culture of the company, and how lots of times it's not about the technology that fails, it's about the culture. So just gonna, since I'm structured this in terms of most obvious smells and then going backwards, I'd just like to point out a few further reading materials. There are many books about security and security culture and everything, but these are the ones that I keep returning to. So these are pretty good books. They talk a lot about people and technology and organizations together. I'm also a big fan of learning from others. One of the things I love about my job is that I work for an oil and gas company, which means that sometimes I get to do strange things, like here, when I'm an oil rig testing software. And you can actually see the software right there. It's a small wearable Internet of Things device that we were testing that day. But also spending times in those environments. It teaches me a lot about safety cultures and security cultures and how they think about things. And as software architects, we can learn lots from the banking industry, from the casino industries. If you look at how they solve security problems, a lot of those things are also applicable to us. So, security. Security, at least the way I think about it, is a mixture of three things. One of them is organization. Organizations are the things we live in, and also the way that we organize our security. Then, of course, it's about technology. It doesn't have to be about IT technology. When I look at my door back home, I still have a manual key for my door, which means that everybody that has the key, and I have kids that lose the key all the time, they can get in through my door. So that means that I also have to deal with people, also known as my kids. They lose and I lose my keys. So once in a while we change out the locks, or we do something else. And if you want to get a good security for your organization or for whatever you want to do, you have to get the balance right. Because where the organization adds a structure and the technology adds automation, if you have the right people, they will add resilience. If they have the wrong people, they will add vulnerabilities. And if you mistake one of these things or if you don't get the balance right, you will probably find that your security culture is being weakened. So I've started to write down something called worst practices. These are things that are the architecture smells, the things that you should be looking for. So if you are working in an organization that thinks that technology alone or organization or people will give you sufficient security, then that's a sure sign of something bad is about to happen. And also, if you work in an organization that thinks that technology and organization and people are independent factors, that's the same thing. So you have to recognize that if you change one of these, if you change the technology, then that will influence the people or the organization. Or you can change the organization, and it will change out it will change how the technology gives you security. One of the things that many people really don't really get about this is that you all have to deal with outsiders, but you also have to deal with insiders. You live in the US. I don't know how many of you heard about the Germanwings crash that we had a few years ago, where the pilot, suffering from a mental breakdown, drove the plane straight into the Alps with all the passengers. And if you listen to the sound from the cockpit that they recovered afterwards, you can hear the other pilot that was in the toilet trying to break through that cockpit door. Because after 9/11, they had strengthened the cockpit door so that passengers shouldn't be able to break through into the cockpit. But once you get the insider, if the insider is your threat, then that security measure suddenly become fatal because they couldn't get through this cockpit door in time to pull the pilot off the sticks, and the plane crashed. So that means that you have to be really good at identifying your insiders, and you have to be really good at recognizing that insider risks are really difficult to manage. There is a lot of organizational bias involved, and different cultures have different characteristics leading to different insider risks. I live in Norway, a small country. Everybody knows everybody, which means that we have something called a measure of social control. I work with my colleagues every day. I spend time with them in the evening. I would notice if one of my close colleagues would suddenly start to develop mental disorders. If you live in another country, you might have less social control. My impression is that in the US, it's easy to hide away in the evenings. Nobody will really know if you don't talk to anybody when you're back home. And so that means that in Norway, the insider risks are difficult to detect because we all trust each other. And that trust, when it comes to insiders, can be really difficult. But in other culture where there's less social bonding, then then you don't have the social control, and it might be difficult to discover if somebody is turning mentally ill. And I'm not saying that one culture is better than the other, but you have to recognize that these cultures are different, and you have to tailor your insider threat modeling accordingly. And if you look at pilots and airline crew, sometimes you get complaints in the newspapers from pilots saying, "I'm flying the plane." That was before the Germanwings crash, by the way. "I'm flying the plane. Don't you trust me enough to not crash it into the mountains?" That particular argument was quickly silenced. But on the other hand, you have these people that you have to have security measures in place to protect them, because sometimes they get coerced. I mean, how many fingers of cabin crew members or the kids of cabin crew members would it take for a cabin crew member to bring a pound of explosives through security if they were not searched? So you have to also recognize that sometimes your security measure is there to protect your insiders from outside coercion. And if you go back to looking at the worst practices, one of the things that you see is that sometimes you meet people that assume that insiders don't exist or that they act alone. If you read one of the books that was mentioned earlier, it was The Insider Threats. They describe how a criminal organization went after 3 leaders in the organization and kidnapped their children to get to what they wanted to do. So you will have insiders, and they will not be alone. They will act in combination to get what they want. Also, most companies, they do background checks. But background checks is something you do when people are hired. I've worked for Statoil for 22 years. So the background check that they did for me back in 1995 might not catch my recent gambling habits or my drug use or my burgeoning mental illnesses. So background checks will not catch all the threats because maybe you're not looking for them. I don't know how it is in the US, but usually mental illnesses is not caught by background checks in Europe. Also, sometimes your colleagues will notice that things are wrong, and they will send messages to someone and assume that they will take action. I have a friend that works in the secret police, or whatever it's called, security service in Norway, and he tells me that sometimes they get tips about foreigners that are suspicious. But it's really hard for the companies that these people work for to actually read the red flags properly. Sometimes it's nothing, sometimes it's something, but you always have to investigate. So if you have a company where you think you know everything is going on, don't assume that your red flags will be read properly. And never forget, or if you forget, that insiders know your security model, then you're in for a surprise. Because they will spend time and they will be there and they will really look for ways of breaking the security. If you look at the casino heists and how they counter casino heists, you can see they have spent a lot of time determining how to do that, or preventing that. Okay, another architecture smell. It's about hacker mentality. Large corporations, they tend to not like hackers, at least not hackers everywhere. Maybe they have some security department where they have some hackers sitting doing penetration testing. But that's not the kind of hackers I'm talking about. I'm talking about those tinkerers that go into something or go into a situation and always look at it. How can I exploit this? Not necessarily exploiting it, but at least thinking about it, because they will find weaknesses. An adversary is always actively looking for somewhere to break you. So you have to have the same kind of people inside your organization that are actively looking for ways to hurt your organization. And they don't necessarily need to be IT people. They can be any kind of people, but you need to have them there. And this is a continuous process. It's not something that you do once a year or once every 5 years or something. This is something that you have to have every day, because the weaknesses are there and somebody will be there looking to exploit them. So another set of work practices. If you only recruit non-tinkerers, if you only recruit people that are compliant, then you will get into trouble. If you only recruit for an IT company, if you only recruit technologists, that will also give you trouble, because you don't have that social skill set, that social knowledge of social models telling you how people will go about breaking your systems. And especially if you start to force compliance. I don't like that, because you always need somebody who is thinking outside the box. And since this is since this is being recorded, I won't tell you about airport security. But if you come and talk to me in the office hours, I'll tell you some interesting observations I've made around metal detectors in airport security screenings. Another topic in terms of in terms of security culture is the concept of black swans. How many of you are familiar with the concepts or know the story of black swans? Okay, some of you. So the black swans were originates from back in the days of Europe, because in Europe we only have white swans. So swans were always considered to be white, and nobody could possibly think that there would be black swans until we got to Australia, because in Australia those black swans, they are quite commonplace. So it went from being something that was totally unimaginable to something that was quite common virtually overnight, or at least in terms of a 3-month ocean journey. And in Europe, we've been seeing the same thing. About a year ago, or less than a year ago, we had the first lorry attack on civilians in Europe, in Nice, in France. It was totally, or not totally, but it was unthinkable before that somebody would actually do that kind of attack. Since then, we've had a lot of attacks. And when I was writing this presentation, there were 2. One in England and one in Sweden, which is not that far from Norway. And the interesting things about IT security is that we are particularly vulnerable to black swans because we have class breaks, which means that sometimes someone will find a vulnerability and someone will learn how to exploit it. And given that IT is a global thing, then it will suddenly become available to all kinds of miscreants in all parts of the world targeting your organization over the internet. So that means that you have to be there, and your security model have to cater for black swans, or class breaks, because they might suddenly appear and then they will become really, really serious overnight. If you look at the CIA Vault 7 vulnerabilities, that's typically an example. Nobody had really heard about them. Suddenly they were there, and now you have people exploiting them. And so your IT infrastructure is not as secure as it used to be. And also, attacks tend to get cheaper over time. If you look at rogue cellular towers, the things that you can use to impersonate being a cell phone tower and use that to force all kinds of security problems to people that are using it, they used to cost tens of thousands of dollars. Now you can buy them from China for $200. That means that if you are a CEO or somebody who has sensitive conversations over cell phones, suddenly someone can put up a fake base tower, or cell phone tower, right next to the CEO office, and then all the calls will be routed through that phone instead. And this morning, I read about a new piece of software which does voice impersonation. Voice impersonation used to be really hard, where you could, so you need to have specially trained actors. But now it's available as a software as a service. So if you have enough sound bites of people, this software will impersonate these people, and based on what you type in, they will sound just like Obama or Bill Clinton or the King of Norway or whoever. And that kind of class breaks can really wreak havoc with your security model. So, in terms of worst practices, we have ignoring the possibility of black swans. That's one thing. But you have the opposite as well, which is base your security thinking on black swans. Because sometimes I hear that, oh, the foreign intelligence services, they are so good. It doesn't really matter what we do, they will get in anyway. Which is true. But that doesn't mean that you don't have to have a proper security in place. Because there are all kinds of other miscreants out there. And even though there will be black swans once in a while, most of your security is about protecting against known threats. And then once in a while you will have a black swan that you need to respond to quickly. But those are very rare. And if you have good people in your security organization, then they will also be that resilience that I talked about in the beginning. So they will allow you to respond quickly. If you don't have good people in your security organization and they are instead a vulnerability, well, then let's just hope that the black swans don't appear. Also, never think that you have time to deal with them, so you have to factor them into your security model. So we have to have a security model that is able to handle that black swans. And if you think that people are not inspired by movie plots, well, think again. Okay, so Dunning-Kruger. How many of you have heard about him or them? Oh, that's good. Dunning-Kruger, they are a pair of psychologists, and they did a lot of testing on this concept of people's perception of their own abilities compared to how they really. This is kind of like everybody thinks they're a better than average driver, so nobody wants to admit that they are below average when it comes to driving a car. But of course, as with any population, there is some kind of distribution. This is where it becomes really dangerous to your security or to the security culture of your organization. Because in the lower end of the spectrum, you have what I called the loud incompetence. And it's not that they are incompetent as such. They might have PhDs or be really experienced in other areas. But in terms of this particular area that you're talking about, whether it be firewall security or onboarding processes or whatever it is, they might have no clue. They think they have clues, or they think they are competent because the organization listened to them. But at the same time, we know that they aren't as competent as they think they are. In the other hand, on the other side, you have the quiet professionals. Those are the people that really are interested in the topic, and they know about it, they think about it. If they have this tinkerer mentality, they will continuously think about how to improve it, how to exploit it, and so on and so on. They tend to underestimate their own capabilities, and there is a name for them as well. It's the imposter syndrome. And if you listen or if you look at a group and you see people that are really quiet, well, either they know that they don't know anything and are being quiet, or they might be those quiet professionals. In the middle, you have people that gets things done, and I'll get back to them in a minute. So, a set of worst practices again. Listen to people only based on seniority, position, or merits. If you listen to the vice president only because he's the vice president, then you're headed for trouble. And if you forget that assumption is the mother of all, then you're also headed for trouble. And this is something that I hear about again and again and again. That but we assumed, and you're headed for trouble. And also, assume that all pertinent information is offered voluntarily. So don't assume that those quiet professionals will come and talk to you out of their free will. You have to build trust, you have to build confidence. And that takes time, and it takes beer or something similar. And beer, I forgot to say that in the beginning, but beer is one of the most useful tools for software architects. You need to know how to master beer, because that is what will gain you confidence with others. Okay, and then it's about understanding risk. The way that I structured this is that I didn't know how much time I would have, since the others would probably go over time. So I just piled together a bunch of smells, and then I'm just doing them in reverse order. So we'll keep doing this for another few minutes, then we'll take a few questions, and then it will be lunch. If you look at safety risks, which is what lots of people deal with, it's about the intersection between probability and impact. So it's you know that if you have valves in your industrial plant and they fail every 50,000 hours, then you have to replace them every 49,000 hours, and you will have no impact. If you replace them every 51,000 hours, there will be an impact. Security, on the other hand, is much more about the intersection of threats, vulnerabilities, and consequences. So that means that, and that also means that where safety is about unintended errors, you know that if you have 1,000 events and 3 of them that will fail, then you know it will fail once in a while. Whereas for security, it's much more about malicious intent. People are out there actively trying to exploit your weaknesses. They are the threats. They are actually out there looking for your vulnerabilities so that they can wreak havoc on your organization. So, set of work practices. If you make security risk decisions based on probability, well, that's not going to fly. If you assess threats, vulnerabilities, and impacts only in technology and not in people, technology, and organization, then you're going to have problems because you're not going to have not going to discover all your vulnerabilities and risks. And then, of course, disregard the global aspect of IT. So the people that were getting things done, they are the people that managers love because they are trustworthy, but they also have a set of not so good traits. They can often use threats to get things done. They can have abusive behavior. They can have all kinds of traits. And if we as software architects discover that we have managers in your organizations that are prone to any of these traits, then you have a security problem because people will be silent. They won't tell you about your security problems. You can read more. The presentation will be online. You can find the link to all of these afterwards. Large organizations, they are populated with people with all of these traits. The higher you get, the worse they are. And if you go down here, you will have people that have career plans, which means that they will also have some of the same traits. And that means that there will be pretty hard barriers. The department managers, they don't want to tell their vice president that they didn't do the right thing because they don't want to hinder their career. And they also don't want to tell the other departments that they didn't do what they were supposed to do. So all of these security incidents, they are not handled properly. They are kept secret. Of course, the same goes to the top of the organization. And this is one of the areas where I kind of like the Scandinavian model of doing things. In Scandinavia, we have these safety events. So the safety events is a way for serious issues oh, now I forget. This is the disadvantage of giving presentations in foreign languages. Whistleblowers. Yes, for whistleblowers to get in touch with senior management and so that they can address important problems. Sometimes it's the unions, and the unions in Scandinavia is not the same as the US unions. So it's actually a quite good collaboration. But you can have employee representatives, so you can implement the concept of an ombudsman or something that will allow you to get that safety valve going. A couple of worst practices. And this is about assuming that information flows freely. No, it don't. Assume that the employee interests are aligned with the corporate interests. They're not. And if you happen to be a senior manager, which you probably aren't since you're here, assume that you know everything going on in your organization. People are really hiding stuff for you. Okay, that was as many smells as I got through. If you want to hear more about my smells, then you can come and see me in office hours. Thank you.
Thank you. We do have time for one or two questions.
Okay,
I do realize that we're between you and lunch.
Yep.
Question from the back.
So was this presentation made by Harald or by your voice impersonator?
This was done by me. It was, but it was, let's say it was inspired by things I have experienced over my years.
Yes. Great. One more?
Yes. In one of the smell was that you should avoid hiring one type of people like non-technologist or technologist. If the need is to hire technology people, how you can hire a non-tech technology and
Well,
vice versa?
yeah, there is the difference between having only technologies like software developers in your team. That's one thing. But in your security organization, if your IT security organization only have IT security experts, then that doesn't work. It needs to have people with social sciences, like social anthropologists or something like that, so that you are able to cover the entire spectrum of security, including the culture. Yeah.
Any more questions? No?
Okay.
Very good. Thank you, Harald. It was great to have a discussion on security in this session.